for the exam. So the information that we are sharing here might not be entirely new, but it's put together in such a way that you can refer to these slides and to this recording in particular. So I'm recording in a moment. Okay, yep. Recording sorted. Okay, let's begin. I try to keep the presentation to less than 40 minutes, and then we can take questions and answers or questions and comments thereafter. So you'll be kept muted until such time that I give you an opportunity to speak. So as I indicated, this is a revision. I will put emphasis on some aspects and just run through others, especially where I know we've discussed stuff extensively in class. I won't put emphasis on that. But I think what is special here is that I also have some examples from essays that have been done by students before you. So you can have a reference point in as far as essay writing is concerned, even though you don't know the question. Yeah, just to remind you, I keep coming back to this slide because this is how we introduced this module. And you need to understand the context of the module in order to understand what we are trying to do with these stories. So it's described as the module explores the basic elements of short story writing and the application in a series of interrelated stories. So here, you remember that we discussed the basic elements of a short story and also the interrelatedness of the stories, where we spoke about intertextuality, for instance. So the primary objective really being to equip you with skills and knowledge needed to analyze and interpret literary texts. So this includes novels and other forms of literature. So by the end of this lecture, or of this module rather, we want you to be able to do comparative analysis. In other words, comparing different stories, and this will extend to different texts, different novels, and different kind of writings that you can actually compare. So what we did was to present the concept of intertextuality, what it's all about. And in a very simplified manner, we described it as the influence that different literary texts have on one another. This influence manifests through different factors. It can be period, setting, characters, plot, and themes. Now, you remember the elements that we emphasized as we discussed the Sooth stories. So those will remain your focus. So in the case of the Sooth stories, for instance, we have contemporary writers. Contemporary writers would be the writers of this generation, that is Scipio Mahala and Zulu Savannah, who are reimagining or responding to Ken Temba's The Suit, right? So we have two stories published in 2002 and 2006, having this dialogue with Ken Temba's story from 1963. So that's what we mean by intergenerational dialogue, where there is intertextuality, right? So yeah, we have, by the way, I've noted the students who are attending the psychology class. I have your name, so that is acceptable. Thank you very much. Now, these three pictures represent the three stories that we are discussing. The first picture of Silo Maikanobe working with a lady. So that is Philemon and Matilda, and you can see the lady is holding the suit. All right. So that image is very clear about what it represents. The second image, you have a man jumping out the window. And as you would recall, that the suit continued is told from the perspective of that man who jumped out the window, and that man in the suit continued, we get to know him, to understand him as a Terence, right? The man whose name was not mentioned in the original version of the suit, Ken Temba's The Suit. And then thirdly, we have Matilda. We have Matilda, from whose perspective the dress that fed the suit is told. As you can see here, she's beautiful, wearing a beautiful dress. And so these are the stories we've discussed, and we've discussed their interrelatedness, the intertextuality between them. We've spoken about the characters that intersect. We've spoken about the plot that intersects, the themes that are explored in the various stories. And then, but going back to the elements of short stories, we mentioned, for instance, that short story, one of the key elements of the short story is that it is brief. In other words, when we discuss what makes a short story short, among other things, we spoke about brevity. All right. And now here is an extract from Ken Temba's The Suit. Right? Let's read this extract. It says, the party went on, and every time Philemon's glare sent Matilda scurrying to serve the suit each course. The guests were no end amused by the persistent mock seriousness with which this husband and wife played out their little game. Only to Matilda, it was not a joke. It was a hot poker down her throat. After the party, Philemon went off with one of the guests who had promised to show him a joint that sells genuine stuff. Boy, genuine stuff. Getting drunk, late that Sabbath, he crashed through the kitchen door onwards to his bedroom. Then he saw her. Now, if you recall, this extract is from the scene towards the end of The Suit, where Philemon discovers Matilda's lifeless body. Now, if you look at this passage, it captures so many things. It talks about the party, and then from the party, after the party, you see Philemon going off with the guests, going to wherever the joint, in other words, the strip in, when they were supposed to get this genuine stuff. And from there, he's coming back drunk and gets to his house and then discovers the lifeless body. So in a different scenario, you would go on about what was happening at the party. You would write a whole chapter or about the party that Philemon, or rather the joint where Philemon went. You could trace Philemon's journey from that joint back home, but it is compressed in such a way that the author takes you to the key elements that he wants to communicate. So in all, this story, even though it entails so much information, but it told in such a brief way. So this is how you trace brevity. This is what we mean by brevity. So by definition, brevity is this sense of immediacy, which makes it convenient to tell a story that can be read within one sitting. So the author needs to account for each and every word used and every action in the story. And there's also what we spoke about, limited characters. You'll notice that in most of these stories, that you will have like, you won't have more than 5 characters, main characters. Actually, you need at least 3 characters to go on with the story. In the suit, for instance, you can talk about Philemon, you can talk about Matilda, you can talk about Mapigela, who is himself a minor character. In the suit continued, you can talk about Terence, you can talk about Matilda, you can talk about the suit itself. And then in the dress that fed the suit, you can talk about Matilda, who is telling the story. You can talk about her husband, Philemon. You can talk about um, Terence, with whom she had an adulterous relationship. You know, with those 3 characters, you have the story. So characters are limited and they are used optimally. So you don't get characters who are wandering there and whom you wonder what is the use of their presence in this space. And of course, we spoke about single plot, that single plot and unity of action are related factors. That the story doesn't branch away a lot. It is clear where it's going. Similarly, unity of action. It is about the organization of the story, that it is focused, is organized around one central theme. So if you were to talk about the plot of the suit, for instance, these are the key moments. If you were to tell someone what is the suit all about, usually tell us about a Philemon waking up and preparing to go to work, and how loving he was to his wife, and getting informed by Mapigela about his wife's adulterous relationship as they meet in the bus stop, and then him coming back home and discovering the suit and using the suit to punish his wife. And lastly, that due to this psychological torture, the whole thing culminates with the death of Matilda. So basically, these are the key points you would mention when you talk about the suit. And that's exactly what we mean when we talk about the single plot, that it is so focused. You can see where the story is being driven towards. And of course, I won't dwell on this. This is self-explanatory. Plato's pyramid. This kind of a pyramid is something you find in almost every story. The only thing I can say is that not every story, for instance, has a resolution. Some stories would end with from the climax you get what is called the denouement, for instance. I will come here where we actually explain these elements. You would recall, for instance, that with regard to the structural features of short stories, for the purposes of the suit stories, or the suit in particular, the main story, I've put emphasis on the rising action because it's so evident that you have such a minor character as Mapigela, whose presence is to change the pace of the story. That the moment he snitches on Matilda, the moment he informs Philemon that his wife is having an affair, immediately at that point, the pace of the story changes. Right? We spoke extensively about this in class, and yeah, I will just jump to other elements. And as I indicated, sometimes a story does not always have to have a resolution. And sometimes resolution and denouement are presented as more or less the same thing. But I am putting, for the purposes of this class and for the purposes of these stories, I'm putting emphasis particularly on the rising action with the involvement of Mapigela there. Now, going back to methods that you could use in reading these stories. And these are elements, are questions that you need to ask yourself as you prepare for the exam or for the assessment. Because we know that you will be asked about these three stories, that they are related, all right? So for you to be comfortable with the understanding of how they are related, ask yourself the narrative perspective of each story. Who is telling the story from what perspective? And how are these stories connected to one another? In other ways, how do these stories intersect? Whatever the exam question will be, it will involve these questions. So if you are able to answer these questions even in your own practicing, you will be able to answer whatever is asked in the exam room. So recurring characters, when you talk about the recurring characters that were in, for instance, the suit, and then you find them in the suit continued. So that's a recurring character. So it's not a new character. How are they different? All right. So Matilda, for instance, is a recurring character because we were introduced to her in the suit. So when we see her again, she's a recurring character. But a character like, the simplest example would be Grace. You meet Grace, who is Terence's wife, in the suit continued. You've never heard of Grace before. All right. So if there's a new character, what new perspective are they bringing? All right. But remember, the first thing really is to look at the narrative perspective. So these questions are interrelated themselves because by answering the first question already, you are touching on the others. And ultimately, you are answering any question that might be asked in an exam room. And lastly, how does the storyline complement or differ with the previous one? So if you're clear about that, then surely you'd be able to answer any question. Oh, I said lastly, but lastly now, your own perspective, has it been changed? For instance, after having read the two installments, the suit and the suit continued, Do you get a new perspective after reading The Dress That Fed the Suit? Or even, for that matter, after having read The Suit and you read Terence's perspective in The Suit Continued, does your viewpoint change at all? So you answer those questions. But key to it, I mentioned, for instance, in class, character and characterization. And all these elements contribute to character development. So character development is a process by which a character grows, changes, or evolves in a story. So you get this, for instance, through dialogue, what they say or what they do, right? So there's a huge distinction in The Dress That Fed the Suit in terms of Matilda's character, because she does not express herself much in the suit. And in the suit, in the Dress That Fed the Suit, she's much more assertive. She presents her perspective quite clearly. So that's the evolution of the character, and that's what we mean by character development. So this is something you can always reference when there's a need. Now, I want to look at the form of assessment that you'll be subjected to as you'll be writing on this on these stories. Unfortunately, you won't be given the topic beforehand. I've been asked about this before. I can confirm once more here, and that is part of the reason why we're creating platforms like this, and we go out of our way to assist you. So just like you did in assessment 1, you'll write in a computer lab. Next week, you will be introduced to new stories. So you will get to choose between those stories and the suit stories in terms of your essay. But remember, you'll have to read all of the stories. You'll have to read all of the stories because you get to write the quiz in both sets of stories. So yeah, the new stories will be introduced to you. I see some of you are already asking questions. I hope some of those questions will be answered in my presentation, but in any case, I will be able to answer the questions once I'm done with the presentation. And of course, the assessment that you will be writing will account for 50% of your semester mark. So you must get it right if you want to pass your first year. Now, coming to the actual writing, I think it goes without saying to say you need to study the question and be clear about what you'll be writing. And you will be given a scrap paper, a piece of paper to write your ideas on. So if you feel like you can start jotting down on that piece of paper, but you won't be allowed to bring material to class. So you will have access to the text, that is, to Writable Dreams, where all these 3 stories can be accessed. That's all you have access to, so that you can reference wherever you want to. But yeah, as you write your introductory paragraph, well, I'm talking about introductory paragraph with the assumption that you understand that your essay has to have a structure with 3 main parts, with introduction, body, and conclusion. So your introduction which, by the way, you don't have to state introduction. I'll give you an example of an essay that you can reference, but as I say, you don't have to write introduction and then write and then body and then write. No, we will know that it is an introduction without you putting a subheading. It is the subheadings that we do not need. Do not write subheadings in your essay. All right. So it's important that you mention the title of the book, and the title of the book will have to be in italics, as you can see here. Writable Dreams is the title of the book, and it is in italics. And then the year of publication of the book should be in brackets. In this case, it is 2019. And then the author of the book, in this case, Siphiwe Mahala. So when you write the author for the first time, you have to write both name and surname. And at no point should you just refer to the author as Siphiwe or in their first name or as Ken. They are not your peers. So from this point, after having mentioned them once, name and surname, you can mention Themba or Mahala or Vanna. All right. And when it comes to the titles of individual stories, they have to be in inverted commas, right? So please understand the difference. The title of a book has to be in italics, as you can see, Writable Dreams and Other Stories. But the title of the individual stories has to be in inverted commas. I will show you this, but it's something that I've been practicing throughout the lectures. And one thing you have to unlearn from your high school days is the practice of saying we when you write. You are writing alone, so please use the pronoun I. All right. So in your essay, for instance, you can say, in this essay, I argue that blah, blah, blah. I will investigate how blah, blah, blah. So this is the kind of pronoun you have to use. Do not use we, all right? Use I. Okay, I've spoken about the elements that would be entailed or should be entailed in your essay, the introduction, body, and conclusion. And again, do not write subheadings. We'll know if it's now introduction or conclusion or body. Now, I'm sharing this question again. I shared this question in class. I'm sharing it again because this essay that I'm gonna give you to use as an example is based on this question. All right, but here I want to share how the previous student wrote the introduction. All right, so the question is about intertextuality. So it says, using the definition by Matusa and Lara, choose two short stories by contemporary South African writers. Remember, contemporary South African writers you are doing here is Mahala and Vanel, and discuss how they intersect with Ken Themba's short story, The Suit, as a way of engaging in an intergenerational dialogue, right? We've spoken about this before. So your introductory paragraph, again, will have to entail the title of the book and the year of publication and the author of the book. Yes. And you must have learned this already. And if you haven't, please revisit the how to write an academic essay document. So your opening paragraph has to have what we call the thesis statement. So a thesis statement is a statement where you explain carefully what you are going to argue in this essay. It doesn't mean you have to list it. I'm gonna argue the head, the tail, and whatever. But succinctly capture the kind of argument that you're gonna be making in this text. I'll give you an example for this. So now, here is an example of an essay written by a first year student in previous years. I won't tell you who she is, and they're definitely not from last year. So don't worry about finding them. But I'm sharing this opening because it might not be perfect, but it's got all the elements that are needed. And it's an essay that received a distinction, right? So whatever the topic is, you have to strive and ensure that you capture these elements that this introduction captures. In other words, she says this essay will discuss the suit in brackets 1963, which is the year it was published. All right, and look, the suit is in inverted commas. The suit by Ken Temba, the suit continued by Spio Mahala, and the dress that fed the suit by Zugisa Vanner. These stories are published in The Red Apple Dreams and Other Stories by Scipio Mahala. Right. So it captures all the necessary elements that we need. Although they are written in different contexts, apartheid and post-apartheid eras respectively, they are all set in the 1950s. So in other words, she's giving context of the stories, that the stories are set in the 1950s. In addition, some salient themes that intersect these stories are infidelity, toxic masculinity, patriarchal imbalances of power dynamics, and gender empowerment. Now, this is what we call the thesis statement. This essay will examine the ways the suit continued and the dress that fed the suit are intertextually related and are in an intergenerational dialogue with the suit. And then she goes on to define what intertextuality is all about. She said intertextuality is a literary concept where texts refer to a preceding one. In addition, they all speak to each other, intersect, and are interconnected. All right. So this is an example of an opening paragraph that works. So in your exercises, you need to practice your opening paragraph. This is just a sample. You don't have to memorize this, but understand the kind of elements that you find. Of course, how you handle it in the exam room will be determined by the question, which you will know on the day you'll be writing the exam. Now, moving to body paragraphs. Firstly, I would advise that you have at least 3 body paragraphs. I'm saying at least because the assumption is that you will dedicate a paragraph to each of the stories. So as a way of ensuring that your essay is nuanced, I would encourage you to dedicate 1 paragraph to each story, whatever the question is. The most important thing is that you should not mix your discussion in a paragraph. Your discussion should be focused. All right. That's why for the body paragraphs, we talk about the topic sentences. In other words, whilst in the opening paragraph with the theme statement, which gives the overall argument, here each paragraph has to have a topic sentence, which gives a clue what this paragraph will be focusing on. And you are encouraged to have a quote from the text. In other words, if in this paragraph, in the first paragraph, you are discussing the suit, identify a line that represents your argument, copy and paste it on your essay, and then engage with that particular extract. And it's important to, when you put a quote there, to analyze it. All right. And the quotes, try to keep them as short as possible, but the maximum, you should not exceed 3 lines when you're taking a quote from a book. Now, here's an example of a body paragraph from the same essay. I'm not sharing the entire essay deliberately. So, Ken Tempers the Suit is written in the third person narrative to focus on Philemon as the protagonist in the story. This shows the privileges of being a male and further highlights the idea of male dominance, which drives infidelity, toxic masculinity, gender inequality, and human subjugation as central themes. The story is set in the 1950s during the time of apartheid in a place called Sophiatown, Town, a home to both Black and white South Africans. The suit is mainly about a happily married couple, Philemon and Matilda, who have a smooth relationship until Matilda commits adultery. So here she's giving context. If we were to continue with the essay, then you'd see here how she captures, for instance, her focus in this essay and how this story intersects with the next one, which is the suit continued. And then she does a similar thing where she puts the suit continued in context and shows how the suit continued intersect with the suit. And then when she finishes that, she then highlights the part that leaves room for Matilda's intervention. We discussed how these stories are related. And then, lastly, in terms of the structure, you should give an overview of your argument and a summary of your insights obtained in the analysis. And do not start a new argument in the conclusion. And but most importantly, always check, is my conclusion related to the question? Because it's easy, because you've been practicing without knowing what the question is. So it's always important to revert to what the question was and ensure that your conclusion in particular relates to the original question. Yeah, so you can revert and put emphasis on your central argument or the central 3 themes that you derived out of this, and what is common between the 3 texts. So now, here's a critical thing about quoting. As I indicated, you'll have these stories that you can quote from, but make sure that you integrate your sentences. So you take the quote and use your own words, your own sentences to introduce it, to put in context. Why is this quote here? What is its relevance? So don't just dump quotes. I'll give you examples. So don't just quote for the sake of quoting. Your quote has to have direct relevance to whatever argument you're making in that particular paragraph. And again, remember, we encourage you to have a quote in each and every paragraph, body paragraph that is. You may not quote in your introduction, you may not quote in your conclusion, but the body paragraph should entail a quote. So here's an example of an integrated quote. So here, this is from an essay. It says, the last time we hear of the fellow adulterer is that, quote, quote, a man clad only in vest and underpants was running down the street. So this is the quote from Ken Temba's The Suit. So that's the last time we hear about that man. And by the way, this is from my own paper where I was talking about The Suit continued. And I say, I was left wondering what happened to the man who jumped out the window and fled the scene. Looked at differently, what sets the conflict off in The Suit is the discovery of an adulterous relationship. Yet the crucial aspect of a fellow adulterer in this triangle remained unexplored. So this is how The Suit continued comes about. And as you would later learn that the woman does not have a voice, and then hence the dress that fed the suit is written. But the main thing here is how the code is used, that you put it in context, right? You don't just dump a code, you precede it by laying the foundation, by writing that sentence. The last time we hear of the fellow adulterer is that, blah, blah, blah. So that's how you quote. That's what we mean by integrating quote. Now, in text referencing, it's important that you reference whatever source you are using, including the book where you're quoting from. So in-text referencing is a referencing that happens in the body of the essay, right? So you need surname of the author of the book, year of publication, page number. So here's an example. In the short story, in The Suit, the last time we hear is that a man clad only in vest and underpants was running down the street. So this quote is from Ken Temba's The Suit. So it's Temba, but it's published in Red Apple Dreams, which was published in 2019. And you find it on page 129. So that's how you do in-text referencing. So this is the same quote. So now you are done with your essay. And bottom of your essay, you need bibliography or a list of references. So whatever sources you might have used. But the most important one, I've put these 3 stories here because obviously they will be part of your referencing. Because you're discussing the suit continued, and the dress that fed the suit. This is how you reference them, right? Again, this is at the bottom of your essay. Once you are done with writing your essay, then and you need to list the books that you referenced. So obviously, these stories, because you'll be discussing them, you'll be required to reference them. So the author of the suit continued. I've put them alphabetically, by the way. So it's Mahala, followed by Temba and Vanda. So it's Mahala Sipiwo. The book was published in 2019, but the story itself was first published in 2002. So that 2002, you put it in square brackets to show the original date of publication. But you only put this information in the references or bibliography, all right? And then you put the title of the story, and it's published in Readable Dreams, and so forth and so forth. So this information will be available in the in the book itself, right? So the same applies Ken Temba as well as Zuke Savannah. And please note, the publication date for Varna fluctuates between 2006 and 2007. I've noted that, and you will not be penalized whether you use 2006 or 2007. You will not be penalized, right? Yeah, the book says 2006, so that should have been the correct one, but it's not an issue whether you say 2006 or 2007, because it's not your mistake. The confusion happened in the slides. And lastly, well, I shouldn't be relating this because it should be obvious. Do not plagiarize. Do not copy in whatever way, and do not even memorize what you might find from AI, because the likelihood is that it is incorrect. And if you write something from AI, you will encounter problems when you mark. So that ends my presentation. Now I will attend to your questions. You will be allowed to raise your hands. Let's see. Okay, the majority are those whose glass clashed. Okay, here's an important question. Oh, sorry. In the suit. Okay, now that we've muted you, you are making noise. By mistake, I ended up muting myself. Okay, in the suit, please keep yourself muted. Now you've been given the authority to mute or unmute, but keep it muted so that you can unmute when you have to ask a question. Anyway, back here. In the suit, we've used that phrase that the last time we hear about that man, okay, I think I'm gonna mute all of you now because you're interrupting. And then you can text your questions. In the suit, there's no character called Terence. We just know a man that jumped out the window. right? So we meet the character called Terence in the suit continued as well as in the dress that fed the suit. So Terence should not be regarded as a recurring character. He is implied in the suit, but he becomes a new character in the suit continued. We get to know him. He speaks, he moves, he gives account of what happened. So yeah, I hope that is answered. And then Bandila here, when we write the assessment, are we going to write about all the two stories, or the question is going to focus on one story? You write about all the three stories. Remember, what you are teaching here is comparative analysis. So you're going to write about the three stories, which is advantageous actually, because you might have struggled to write the whole essay about one story. Okay, I'm not sure about Ushekwetu Kwala's question. Can you please make a follow-up? Because it says we will be given all short stories and choose our own stories. What I can tell you is that for the short stories, you will have to discuss all three at the same time. That is one. Secondly, you will be studying new stories next week. So when you write an assessment, when the time comes, you will choose between the source stories and the new stories that you would have been given. Okay, I'm still reading through your questions. What can one focus on in analyzing short stories brevity in an essay? Okay, look, brevity on its own won't be a question. We're putting emphasis in the context of on brevity in the context of the basic elements of a short story. You won't be discussing the basic elements of a short story. You can mention them, but the key thing here is that you will do comparative analysis between the three stories. So if one is more brief than the other, then that will be applicable, but that won't be the crux of the matter. The structure won't be the issue. The issue is comparison between the three stories. And when you talk about comparison, it's not about which story is better than the other. You look at certain elements that you can compare between the stories. Okay, here's another question. Do we have to include the surname and year of publication each and every quote in each paragraph? And not necessarily. After you've done it the first time, you can simply, if it's still Red Apple Dreams that you are quoting, then you can simply put the page number. All right. You put it the first time, and then for the rest of the time, if it's the same text, then just give us the page number. Yes, the stories will be there, Nobile. The stories will be available for you to reference. Word count for the essay, I think it's about 1,200 to 1,500 words. Yes, there's the Elizabeth Julia. The the assessment will be written during the exam season. Yes, you will be given the dates in due course. Well, I've given you, I see Ngululeko is writing, is asking a question about the thesis statement, how you write it when you don't know the question. Look, I've given you a question that you can use to practice. And I've given you an extract from a previous student. So use that to practice. Of course, you cannot memorize. What I need you to be able to do is to understand how you capture the essence of a thesis statement, what your introduction has to entail, and then you'll deal with the question at that time when it's presented to you. Okay, if you are paraphrasing, we still need the, okay, if you're paraphrasing from the source stories, I wouldn't encourage you to paraphrase anyway, because we need the exact phrase and page number. But if you are paraphrasing another book as a secondary material, then give us the publication details of that book. Obviously, we won't have access to that book, and therefore we won't know the page number. That is understandable. But give us who is the author of that book and when was it published. Okay, Malibana, you're asking about the stories. Yes, you're correct. You will choose between these three stories and the stories that you'll be taught next week. Kebe is where you're asking about questions to practice on. You've been given questions. Spokuhle, I've provided examples for referencing. Please go back to those. And again, Spokuhle Njiako, your question, I would like to know that are we supposed to write the stories separately, e.g. paragraph 1 is based on the suit, paragraph 2 is about the suit continued. Yes, I will encourage you, in order to have a nuanced essay, I will encourage you to focus your paragraph, one paragraph in one story, the next paragraph in the other. And then if you have like 6 paragraphs, for instance, you can have maybe the 4th paragraph that then, talks about the stories above. But what I encourage you is to focus each paragraph. It is easier that way, and you are able to focus. Okay, here is Mohorwe. When doing the comparison, do we focus on the characters or the story as a whole? It depends what the question is all about, but I am giving you an opportunity to focus on the story as a whole. If, for instance, you go back to those questions about how to read or reading the Sue stories, then you'll be able to touch on all these elements. No. Here's a question from Kaya Ngwenya. Isn't referencing or citing a way to show that it's not plagiarism? Instead, you took the information somewhere. It is pure mahala. If so, then why are we told not to plagiarize? No, referencing and plagiarizing are two different things. Plagiarizing is using information and not acknowledging the source. Whether that information is from another book is from AI or the internet. If you don't acknowledge the source, then that is plagiarism. Referencing, you do indicate that this extract is from the dress that fed the suit. So you take that and then analyze. You can read more about plagiarism. Okay, there's a consistent question here about when are we writing. The dates will be announced. It will be during the exam period, and you will be given the dates. Oh, here's a question. Do we have a class tomorrow? Yes, the second group has the final class tomorrow. We are going ahead with the class as planned. Okay, here's a question from Kanyesile. Could you please elaborate on the idea of using personal pronouns like I? Is it academical to state my opinion? For example, using phrases like I believe, in my opinion, or is the I in my essay used to account for what I have written? Yes, the I mean, what you are writing is your opinion anyway. You are encouraged to be an independent thinker. That is why we're encouraging you to use the pronoun I. It is official. It is the way of writing academic essays. And you find this, by the way, even in the How to Write an Academic Essay guideline, which is available on Moodle. Please revisit that, because some of the ideas I touch on them here, but I don't elaborate. Okay, in-text references, do I mention author of the book or of the short story? Mention the author of the short story. There is that example, for instance, of Themba. Yes, it is from from Red Apple Dreams, but the author of the story is Ken Themba. Okay. Okay. Kuhle kwethu Kwala. I thought I addressed this question. Let me read it. I would like to know that we are supposed to write the stories separately, e.g., paragraph 1 is based on the suit, paragraph 2 is about the suit continued, etc., etc. Yes, it is the way that I encourage you to approach the structure of your essay. In other words, paragraphs should be focused on particular stories. In one paragraph, you can discuss the suit continued, the suit. In the next paragraph, you can discuss the suit continued. And then in the next paragraph, you can discuss the dress that fed the suit. And then in your concluding paragraph, for instance, or in the next paragraph, then you can then show the intersections that happen, regardless, I mean, depending obviously on the question, all right? But to ensure that your discussion is nuanced, I am encouraging you to focus each paragraph on a particular story and not mix them up, because you might even end up getting confused yourself. So I encourage you to focus each paragraph on a particular story. Kiabetswe, So the questions will always be about comparisons between the three stories. Yes, that's why we discussed the three stories, because we're teaching you to be able to do comparative analysis. So whatever the question is, it will involve the three stories. Rejoice Sebe, are we supposed to write like the suit in italics or in inverted commas? Again, what you write in italics is only the title of the story, in this case, Red Apple Dreams. The individual stories, the suit continued, or the dress that fed the suit, should be in inverted commas. Okay, I believe I've answered most of your questions. I think there was a question from Sumaya. I'll give you 5 minutes to ask questions. I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask questions.
Hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I wanted to know, like, in the poems we had to study like all the poems. Should we also do it like in the story? Prepare for everything and then you guys won't tell us nothing. Is it like that also this time?
No, I think I've been very clear with regard to the suit stories. You have to study all three stories because you'll be comparing them. So with this unit, with this module, you are definitely gonna, if you answer the two stories, then you definitely gonna do a comparison between the three stories.
So it's almost like doing one, then you have to basically have knowledge of above all of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, Sumaya.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that was you. All right. Any other question? Okay, I believe I've answered most of your questions. But to emphasize that point again, in this module, it's about comparative criticism. You will be comparing the three stories. So I advise you to focus a paragraph to each story in order to have a nuanced discussion focusing on the suit, and then you move on to the next paragraph focusing on the suit continued, and then the dress that fed the suit. And then you can write your conclusion on the basis of that. Okay, thank you very much. This recording will be available for you to access whenever you want to reference it. Thank you and all the best with the module. Keep well.
Bye. 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 Bye.